Um, I started last time with a discussion about the process of loss and grieving and how it is really quite a healthy process. And people are kind of avoidant of it, and they think, oh, if there's loss or grieving, you need a therapist or you need a specialist or something. And that's really not true. You just need a human being to be a companion, to accompany you on your journey of loss and grieving. It's not a psychopathology. You don't need a therapist. What I realized afterwards, by some of the questions that I got from that I read afterwards, was that there was an interest also in the other form of dealing with loss and grief, which is experienced as a result of trauma. Loss is not trauma. Loss and grief in a normal course of events, I don't think of as trauma. Trauma is a different kind of an animal. So I thought we'll talk about that today and distinguish between these normal processes of change and loss and grieving, and distinguishing that from trauma and traumatic experiences, which require very similar interventions, but they are different from the healthy thing. Very often trauma does require a therapist or some kind of intervention or assistance for the person to negotiate the impact of trauma. So firstly, just different types of trauma. What is trauma? I think we'll start with that. For me, trauma is something which occurs outside of the normal range of human experience. In other words, it's not the normal range of human experience that we consider to be traumatic. These experiences are definitely something which is out of control, unpredictable on the part of the person being traumatized, and is not something that is necessarily in a part of normal experience. So it's outside of what we're prepared for, and it's outside of what the world prepares us for also. So both personally and in the environment, there are very few conditions that prepare or help to support and negotiate somebody going through trauma like this. It's a result, it's a serious emotional, physical injury. Let's start with that. We're going to talk about the emotional and psychological shock that a person can experience from an act of violence or an accident that is quite violent. It causes huge distress and disruption to your normal life and your sense of identity, not yours, but people who've been through it. Some of you have. It can create a long-lasting weakening and impairment to our healthy development. In other words, these kinds of traumatic events can have long-lasting, maybe even permanent impairment to the emotional and psychological development of the person. And it usually occurs in situations of unpredictability and uncontrollability And it's associated at the same time with feelings of helplessness and vulnerability. So you put all of that together, and now we have a better idea of trauma. Trauma is something that can be experienced along a continuum from natural traumatic events all the way through to man-made traumatic events. Now, but these traumatic events need to meet certain criteria. They're very often experienced as near-death experiences. The person is put in shock by this experience of annihilation, or the potential of a complete loss of capacity to be in control of anything. And it's a very terrifying experience. They are pretty vulnerable and helpless in that situation. These natural events can be earthquakes, tsunamis, which is a kind of earthquake, storms, hurricanes that are devastating and outside of the normal range of experience. And that goes all the way, the continuum goes all the way through to man-made disasters. And here we're talking about some things that many of us have experienced and know: torture, war, other acts of violence, which is intentional on the part of human beings on other human beings. These are also experiences beyond the normal accepted expectation of life. So these natural disasters and man-made disasters are not are generally the kind of things we're talking about today. This is not a normal developmental phase where there's loss of identity, loss of status, and a new status is gained, and we grieve with the loss and we move on. Here, the experience is pretty devastating emotionally and psychologically. Most importantly and interestingly, what some research has shown, I think all the research has shown, is that man-made disasters are more negatively impactful on a person than so-called natural disasters. So when you talk about things like hurricanes or some natural disaster, people seem to bear those conditions, even though they're devastating. They may lose their homes, they may lose family members, lots of devastation can happen, but generally, they tend to appear to do marginally better in recovery than those of us who are impacted by human disasters, the violence that one human being does on another. And we will look at that later and see why that is. So, I mean, it makes sense to me, and I presume it'll make sense to all of you guys. So, in general, I would say that with these traumatic events, you can have a one case where it's enough to create a reaction that requires psychological intervention. You don't need multiple hurricanes to be impacted negatively by one significant hurricane, or war, or something else like that. But generally, we live in a time now where there's also the possibility of ongoing traumatic experiences in a continuous way, and that's given rise to new issues and new difficulties. Psychologically, there are not that many psychiatric conditions associated with trauma. Usually, these reactions to catastrophic events are firstly acute, what is called acute stress disorder. It's a stress disorder which is patterned over a month. Anything a month or less of the shock of trauma is considered acute stress disorder. After a month, when those symptoms are now ingrained and there is more reactiveness from the patient, from the client, they have more difficulties, they're not recovering, they still feel, they have nightmares, they're very vigilant, they have startle reactions, they have all of those panic sort of reactions, and we call this then, they usually label this as post-traumatic stress disorder. So this would come after about a month. That you may change your diagnosis from acute stress disorder to post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't really matter what you call it, because essentially it's a process whereby the identity of the person has been damaged significantly by the event of the disturbance on their functioning, on their normal familiar functioning. The next kind of traumatic reaction is called continuous or complex traumatic stress. This is a situation whereby the stress situation is pervasive and continuous. It doesn't seem to stop. It's day after day after day. And I think in Lebanon, there's you could argue that it's a continuous stress reaction with day after day, something being significant going wrong and demanding something from the people involved when they feel their resources are less and less and less. It's not exactly a war, but a war situation would be similar, where day after day it's kind of going on. Or torture, for example, where people are taken off the street and detained and tortured outside of control, outside of any laws, basically, and they are left to have to manage for themselves. Okay, so these are the situations I'm going to that I'm asking you to keep in mind when we talk about trauma now. So far, are there any questions? Just want to check from anybody. Any questions? Okay. So I am saying that here we need some professional help. We need people who know what they're doing, who can understand how the traumatic event, which is usually an environmental event, an event outside of the person, that is inflicted on the person, where they cannot control it, they cannot end it, and the damage pervasive, and there are numerous significant ruptures of important relationships that occur. In other words, they may be removed from important family members or relationships. They may witness relationships being ended. They may be subject to all sorts of conditions that violate their sense of autonomy and agency. In other words, the sense of control is completely violated in these situations. So there are three main ways of working that I understand from this. First, I'm going to compare and contrast. There's a humanistic perspective. There's a psychoanalytic perspective. And then there's, of course, a Gestalt perspective, which falls between them, I think. It's not humanistic, and it's not psychoanalytic. Essentially, the humanistic perspective is a very optimistic one, which basically maintains that any of these events have the potential for significant growth and significant opportunity for maturity and for what's going on here? For maturity and for wonderful awarenesses to develop, and essentially this phase of working, the way you work with in a humanistic approach is you expose the person to the experience of the trauma in small steps, in such a way that they learn to master them. It's a self-mastery approach. And they learn to self-master, and that self-mastery that they learn is then carried into their future lives. And they come out better people for that. So they've learned an experience of coping that they perhaps would never have had the opportunity to learn had they not been in this situation. And they've learned some more skills they've learned some skills of what we call self-mastery. Self-mastery is a watchword, if you like, for humanistic psychology. A lot of it is aimed at self-mastery. How can I be a better person? Buy a few self-help books and study them up, and I will learn 7 new ways to be a better person, or 5 ways to be a better partner. And I will change myself, I will master something. And this is generally the approach that the humanists take. They believe that this is possible, that you can be, well, almost anything you want to be. You just need to know how to master your impulses and your way of living. They have I'll see if I can find this quote here. When they have that self-mastery idea, they can take some action. But the quote I'm looking for, yeah, here it is. The optimistic humanistic approach sees trauma as an opportunity for growth. One person here writes that everyone who goes through the process ends up better, stronger, smarter, deeper, and more connected. New values emerge and renewed commitments to life and living follow. from working through of these painful experiences. And I wrote here that I believe this humanistic approach unrealistically romanticizes the personal benefits of trauma. I think it is a kind of a romantic idea. I don't think that all trauma results in people growing up better, stronger, and all of those things. I think they're lucky to come out alive. They know it, and they may be very grateful for that, and they learn something about gratitude. But whether they've learned any more skills about how to survive a traumatic event in a way that they won't be damaged, I seriously doubt. Now, the psychoanalytic view, again, I'm giving you a very short synopsis. I've taken this from a guy called Stollerow, who is a pretty well-known psychoanalyst and has been brought into focus in Gestalt therapy by some therapists who have been very significantly influenced by Stollerow's perspective. For Stollerow, trauma distorts the client's experience of time. It freeze frames the client's identity. In other words, the moment and the event of the trauma is an anchor, if you like. If you know NLP, it's an anchor to a phenomenologically significant event which is carved in concrete, if you like. It will not disappear. It is there forever and will never be eradicated or erased. And the impact and the damage that it does, the trauma at that time, is forever ingrained. Okay, it's a very opposite view to the humanistic point of view. For Stollerow, his point of view is that, let me read it. Trauma devastatingly disrupts the ordinary linearity and unity of experience of time. Our sense of stretching along from the past to an open future. This is damaged. Experiences of emotional trauma become freeze-framed into an eternal present in which we remain forever trapped, or to which we are perpetually condemned to return through the triggers supplied through our life's experience. Trauma, in other words, is timeless. Now, that is very different from the point of view of the humanists. The basis, he continues that the basis of shame and isolation precludes the possibility of closure of trauma. For Stollerow, the perpetual return of emotional trauma is ensured by the finiteness of existence. In other words, the fact that we all know we're going to die makes it inevitable that we will always return to this emotional trauma of near-death experience, and the finiteness of the relationships of those we love. So he's arguing that trauma looms for all of us as an ever-present possibility. In other words, for him, trauma is pretty close to natural, actually, and we need to learn to live with it. Here, Stollerow insists that enduringness of trauma, because it never goes away and we have to endure it. It is endured because it can only be tolerated in a relationship of deep emotional understanding, where we stay open with the person in his or her emotional pain, so they are not left alone with it. Trauma can never be dealt with. You can only it can just be endured in a deeply understanding relationship with another person. Now, that is a pretty pessimistic view, in my opinion, of trauma. But I want to stop there for now and just check if people have any questions about these 2 points of view. The humanistic, optimistic, rah, let's all be happy, we're going to be better, braver, stronger, bigger, whatever, versus, oh boy, we are messed, we are screwed, in simple English, and we will never be able to live a normal life, and we will always be dependent on the well-being of another to keep comfort and be with us, because we cannot get past this trauma. Once the bell has rung, you cannot unring the bell. It's done. It's balance idea of a broken link, something broken. Are there any questions? Such polarized views. Yes, there are. I see. That's how I understand the humanistic and Stoller's point of view. I think they understand we need to work with trauma, but one is very optimistic and one is not at all.
How do you spell the name of Stellaro?
Stellaro, S-T-O.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat, so other people can get it too also.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay.
Jay, I have a question. You mentioned that as a result of trauma could be a PTSD. Would you pay attention to difference between CPTSD and PTSD from complex version of it, or
Yeah,
do you think?
Yeah, look, these labels are interesting, and they have been useful at different times. PTSD was around long before this complex PTSD. PTSD essentially in those days, as I remember, when I learned about it, it was essentially focused on a single traumatic event called PTSD. Let's say a bomb going off in a war situation. If I'm driving a vehicle and my colleagues, comrades in the Jeep are killed, I manage to survive and lose my legs, whatever. But it's a one-time event like this would have been what I think was called PTSD. What people recognized later is that actually it's not very often that a person in a war situation or a situation of trauma is only encountering the trauma once. That, for example, some traumatic situations people find themselves in are recurrent, and that could be traumatic situations in a family, growing up, in a war situation, in torture. But the difference is, they speculated that there's a difference, or they wanted to treat them differently. The original treatment, as I understand it, of PTSD was you would take the person out of the traumatic situation to treat them, not to another planet, but in a place that was considered to be relatively safe, environmentally safe. Whereas continuous post-traumatic stress disorder, you'd find yourself treating people in the situation where they are actually being abused or tortured or traumatized and re-traumatized. So it's a much more complex kind of approach, and I'm not sure how well it works when the person is maintained in that situation. It's like I guess it's a bit like trying to teach a drowning man or drowning person to swim while they're drowning. It's like, whoa, that's perhaps not the right time. They need to be rescued, and then they can learn to swim. They need to be taken out of the situation and then taught to swim. But certainly the fact of continuous post-traumatic stress disorder is a fact. It exists. The treatment may be more difficult because of the nature of the environment and the lack of resources to actually support the treatment, to support the healing. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So for
others may want to add something else.
Yeah. Thank you.
You want to add something, Carolina?
Yes, I was just reflecting while you were speaking on it. So, for example, shell shock soldiers or war neurosis. Yes, is this example of the symptomatic version of PTSD, or?
Well, shell shock was a common term used for people from the First World War, if I recall correctly.
Yes, yeah.
Who came back from the war and in some ways were damaged, call it that. It was kind of not seen as something that people got too excited about. I think that many shell shock clients probably were suffering from PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, and even until relatively modern, late 20th century times, these conditions of war veterans coming back, getting treatment, recognizing their symptomatology, recognizing that they have PTSD, was a relatively late acknowledgement. This was not really that much considered as a problem, until the second half of the 20th century. So shell shock was just a kind of, oh, well, it's like having a flu. Yeah, you're not well, but it's not that serious. Whereas now I think people see it much more seriously.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference. But I do believe many of them had PTSD. Anything else for now? Okay. So for Gestalt therapy now, which is the middle road that I would like to spend a little time on. I don't see it as we do not have a romantic idea of dealing happily with trauma and every client coming out better, bigger, stronger, etc. I think from a Gestalt point of view, there are things we can do that go beyond simply offering relational comfort, which Stollerer seems to suggest, more than just relational comfort or empathy, that all we can offer is empathy from the analytic point of view, or we can jump up and down with joy when a trauma client walks in. No. Gestalt therapy basically is a therapy, is I don't know what was, if you guys read this thing. Let me see if I can find it. Oops. Where I describe Gestalt therapy as based on a hypothesis that change is the only constant. I think I've talked about that before. So nothing is constant except change. My computer is singing to me. All change in some way involves loss and grieving. But we aren't involved here with looking at Gestalt therapy, where we deal with change which is beyond the realm of human experience, beyond the normal familiar experience of growing up. This is the unexpected and socially unsupported impact of a toxic environment. All trauma is initially sourced from a toxic environment. By toxic, I mean dehumanized, an environment that does not support human relationships. It's something else that is dominant in that kind of culture, and it's certainly not what is not dominant is the support of human contact and awareness. What is more dominant is rather the violence and destructiveness and interruptions of awareness and contact, often through fear, the environment creating fear or shame or guilt, which are very powerful ways of destabilizing one's identity in the community. When a community is dominated by shame or anxiety or guilt, you do have a toxic environment which is perfectly suited now to creating trauma. So I'm going to look at these different conditions of shame, anxiety, and guilt, and look at how they occur and how they impact on the individual, on the self process, and what we can do from a Gestalt point of view to try to help the client to be more able to participate in as healthy a way as possible in the environment. And sometimes that means actually leaving the environment. Sometimes it involves saying goodbye to the whole place that you're in. And I think that we know there are many people who have done that because the environment is just too toxic for them, whether it's from Lebanon or from Ukraine or from other countries where there are people desperate to get away because of a toxic environment. where the generally the support system needed to maintain community is stretched thin, put it that way. So we're looking at how these shame, anxiety, and guilt impact the capacity for normal, healthy development and growth and maturation, and how we can try and intervene when we need to do what with clients. If this is an issue of shame or anxiety or guilt, how can we best provide conditions where the person learns to be self-supportive enough to be able to stay aware and in contact in order to make organismically functional, creative decisions and actions that will help them rather than let them just not survive. Does that make sense? Or is that too many words? Too many words, I think. All right. No one's saying anything, so I don't know.
No, it makes sense.
Oh, I love you, Carolina. You're wonderful. At least
Me
you
too.
give
I
me.
love you too, Jay.
You give me. Maybe somebody else will also talk at some point, but we'll see. So
I have a question. You are attaching the traumatic experience heavily to shame, anxiety, and guilt. And the quality of those situations in the human psyche is kind of contracting element, I guess, holding back or pulling in or shying away. But are there any other aspects from the Gestalt view that are contributing to the traumatic experience, or I mean, because I'm noticing we are not using the classic like projection or proflection or those elements in this. We are thinking about something which is being suppressed or something that is, being violated or abused.
Yeah. Okay, let me just say, I don't want to go too much into Gestalt therapy theory, but maybe I need to do a little bit to contextualize when I talk about shame, anxiety, and guilt. I mean, people may be wondering why do I talk about those things and nothing else? There's hopelessness, there's helplessness, there's projection, there's so many technical terms. The Gestalt therapy theory of the self is that the self, in accordance with the idea of change, and change is something that occurs over time. In other words, the self is an event that happens over time. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. Who I am at the beginning of the process is I am my need. I notice what I need. I become aware of my need. And I describe and define myself as my need. My need is simply what is lacking. Okay? I may call it hunger. I'm hungry. What I'm lacking is food. I'm thirsty. What I'm lacking is water. The need describes what is experienced as a lack. All right. Now that need has the first task here is to identify your need accurately. What do you need? Many people have no idea. They're clueless. They have no idea what they need. And you say to them, well, what does it feel like you need? And they say, feel? I don't know what you're talking about. What's a feeling? And it's really hard work. These people are stuck at what we call the very first phase of the self process, which is identifying the need accurately in awareness. What is the need? And often it is a problem of being, the client is very desensitized. Now, how do they get to be so desensitized is the question. And what is that about? So we're going to talk about shame now. First part of that cycle, when somebody's need is regularly and consistently and persistently invalidated by a significant other. In other words, let's blame mama again. We're fond of blaming mama. Mama doesn't see that I'm hungry, and so I stop crying and I stop feeling hungry because my crying doesn't help. I tried to tell mama that I'm hungry, but mama's too busy working hard for my university future or gambling in the casino or whatever mommy's doing. Mommy's not paying attention to my need. So my need is not validated. When my need is not validated, what do? I can keep yelling, but it doesn't help. So eventually I decide that this is too painful. And obviously my need is unimportant for mama because nobody comes to pay attention to it. Therefore, if no one pays attention to my need, I am not worthy of anything. I'm worthless. I'm bad. I must be bad if no one's coming to take care of my need when I can't. Talking about the first couple of years. So I desensitize my need. I stop paying attention to the discomfort of my hunger or my thirst or whatever my need is. My need for touch, my need for love, my need for normal narcissistic admiration, my need for security, safety. I stop paying attention. I desensitize my awareness of my need. Okay. What's happened here is that a colleague of mine described shame as the unwanted withdrawal of environmental support. Now here, my mother is my environmental support. I need her. And in the presence of the unwanted withdrawal, mama's not here, mama does not pay attention, I am missing out on getting my need validated. I feel shame when there's the unwanted withdrawal of environmental support. This is the definition of shame. So that is a very general term for struggles that people have at the beginning of a process of the self-functioning. So when it comes to trauma, a traumatic situation there is shame, when my need is simply dismissed as unimportant or not validated in any way. I'm left feeling shame, I'm left feeling desensitized, and that becomes very often a feature of addictions, of eating disorders, of personality disorders. People who fall into those categories generally experience great problems with their bodily sensations. You ask them, what are they feeling? Nothing. I mean, the delicate wrist cutters, as I call them, the delicate cutters, when they start to do that, they have been traumatized significantly in a family context. And the only way they can begin to feel something is privately, and they see the blood and feel the pain and know then that they exist. Otherwise, they don't feel that they exist. So we're dealing with one kind of trauma and a kind of intervention that is very significantly focused on the situation of the self function. The second self function is the next stage, which is action. Once I know what my need is, I have to do something about it. I must perform some action. In Gestalt therapy, we call it healthy aggression. We have to reach out to the environment in order to appropriate or take in an appropriate way the resources that are available in that situation that hopefully will satisfy the need. That's the next stage. Now, that's where we sometimes have difficulties. We interrupt ourselves, and the difficulty is almost always organized around managing the experience of anxiety. Anxiety is when I become distressed. I feel anxious because of some kind of catastrophic expectation. Something is going to happen, and I become anxious, and I become anxious in an effort to try to control the future. Something that's going to happen. I believe it's going to happen. It's an exam that I'm going to take tomorrow, so I get anxious. Or it's a performance I have to do today to give a lecture in front of 30 people, and I get anxious. That's what I'm talking about. This kind of anxiety is the normal neurotic garden variety of psychotherapy that we're all familiar with. This is what we generally expect to work with when we work with our neurotic clients. Usually it's around the management of anxiety. The final part of the self is around managing guilt. And this is where it's time, we talked a little bit about that last time to let go, to detach, to move on. My need is now satisfied, and I'm ready to move on. Okay. Now, when I move on, that means I have to lose a relationship with something or someone. And that rupture of the relationship is experienced very often as guilt. And we see this in a war situation. I've seen it over and over with Ukrainians that I work with, where many of them now find themselves living in Europe. They find themselves there, quite literally, even though they took themselves there. But when they took themselves there, they were not necessarily fully aware what they were doing. They just wanted to survive. And they find themselves there, and now they feel very guilty. Firstly, they've survived. Why me? And secondly, they've left some very important people back there. And they've also lost some very important things. They've lost their homes. Some of them have had their homes bombed, for example. They feel guilty because they have left for all the right reasons, but they feel a tremendous amount of guilt because of the ruptures to the other relationships that they have had. And so they're being treated. The trauma of this situation involves a different kind of intervention again. So when we talk about shame, anxiety, and guilt, I'm talking about the need to be able to discriminate where in this continuum your client is struggling. Are they struggling with the beginning part, with the acknowledging that they have a need and they feel shame about that? Are they struggling with action, with healthy aggression, to go and do what they need to do to satisfy their need? Or are they struggling with guilt? and unable, or unwilling rather, unwilling to make the decision to alter their lives and to participate in some way differently in the situation that they find themselves. What we're looking for in Gestalt therapy is for the person to find ways to maintain their capacity to participate effectively in the situation, even though it may not be ideal. We do not live in an ideal world. We do not live in a fair world. And if we're going to wait for the world to become fair and ideal, we'll never act. We'll never get there. So we want to help the clients to find enough self-support to be able to stay aware and be in contact in order to be here, be now, and be ready for the next. That's all we're trying to do. But we are hugely dependent, and this is where Gestalt therapy is different from other therapies. We recognize the importance of the environment to provide the support. Now, what are the supports that generally are there in situations of loss? There are many supports in the normal situation of loss, that the environment, that our culture, whatever culture, has provided for people to get some kind of comfort and some kind of meaning and some kind of community and support when they're going through a process of a traumatic process or a process of loss. Okay, all trauma is loss, not all loss is traumatic. But these people then go through a ritual. There are rituals in the normal life that support people when they're dealing with familiar cultural situations. There are remarkably few universal or cultural, even separate cultural rituals that have evolved to deal with man-made trauma. We often prefer, whether we're the winners or the losers, we don't like to talk about the rituals, recognizing the giving support to those people who have been traumatized, whether they're Vietnam vets or Vietnamese Viet Cong, I don't know. There are remarkably few rites of passage or rituals that we create consciously to support the damage to people who have experienced these kinds of traumas. I think it seems to me that there's a lot of shame and guilt and anxiety about war. People don't want to acknowledge and deal with the consequences. They just want the symptoms to disappear. They want the wounded not to be on the streets. They don't want to see it. But it's a really difficult situation when the environment refuses to provide conditions to support these survivors. I'm going to call them survivors of trauma, but they really are also victims of trauma. And they're doubly victimized when society turns their backs on them, when the culture doesn't truly understand what they need and provide rituals that normalize. How can you normalize? But that when I say normalize, that reinvites and rehabilitates the person who is traumatized back into some kind of status in their society. There's a lack of rehabilitation. And I mean rehabilitation in the proper sense of the word. I don't mean getting your arm to move again when you've damaged it. I mean finding a new home, rehabilitation, helping people to find a new home because they lost the home they had. And this process of rehabilitation is not something that I don't know about in Lebanon, but in the United States, we're really poor at it. We really are shocking. We do not do much to really encourage rehabilitation. It's more a case of, yeah, in principle, we like rehabilitation, we like the idea, but NIMBY. Do you know what NIMBY is? NIMBY, huh?
No.
Stands for not in my backyard.
Oh.
Yeah, let's have rehabilitation, but not in my backyard. Over there. That's NIMBY. Yeah, Birgit.
I agree about what you are saying. And I want to tell you that something happened quite close to me this Sunday. 3 people were shot in a big shopping center, and
Yes.
a lot of people were injured. And just now, when we are talking together, there's a memorial going on where the Prime Minister and the Crown Prince and his wife and a lot of people are attending this. And they are really much aware about not stigmatizing psychotic persons, because the shooting was carried out by a psychotic man. And I think that we had developed some traditions in Denmark around the victims. There has been a few big incidents with people getting killed at some events, and there has developed some bit of passage about going to the place and making it a safe place again, and important people in society attending, and like a memorial event to celebrate the victims. So I think that things change all the time.
You know, Birgit, we do that regularly in the United States when there are children murdered in schools.
Yeah.
We have a memorial, we have a service, we have thoughts and prayers, and we don't change our gun laws. There is no, you know, my question is really, it's great that the Prime Minister comes and says something. My question is, what is the real commitment here to understanding the underlying conditions of what makes somebody take a gun and do what they did in Denmark? What are the underlying conditions? It's very easy simply just to write this one off as one crazy guy. We've been doing that for years in the United States. Well, so far this year, we've had about 450 crazy guys in a few months, if you want to look at it that way. And the crazy guys never stop. So I want to see more. What I really think that we have a blind spot culturally to the need for a ritual that provides some kind of closure for these kinds of man-made traumas, because the man-made trauma is the issue, not just how we're going to deal with the victims. How is it possible that there are these traumatic events happening again and again, whether at an individual level or a level of a national war between countries or amongst countries, and we do nothing about it? It seems that we are very, very slack. I mean, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I think the United Nations has done nothing to help, whether it's the Lebanese situation or the Ukrainian situation. And it's like everybody seems to think it's business as usual. I don't understand it, and I don't accept it. And I find it very frustrating that they just say, well, we'll have a meeting. We'll have a whatever. But then I don't want to get anyone into trouble here by talking too much about the politics of it. But I certainly do feel that we don't do enough. And I think that as psychotherapists, we are at the front line of having to change that, having to change the awareness of people about what we have to do at a community level, at a national level, what we have to do at an interhuman level to provide for a space where human beings can live, not just die with a memorial. So that's...
one comment, I don't want to go too deep into this. I have been part of this for many, many years, working with the traumas and crises like this event that happened here. So one thing that is happening is looking very close on the psychiatric system, how to prevent similar situations. And another thing is to, for instance, to train how to evacuate a big shopping center. It was clear that there were some of the evacuations, some of the places that was supposed to be for evacuation were locked. So people couldn't get out even if they were in front of a door. So that has to be changed. Another thing is that it was actually legal weapons, but this guy had borrowed them from a friend, and you can do some preventive thing around that. But it could be a very, very long story. And they are talking about it in the medias 24 hours a day now, since it happened, of course. But it's a place I go 2 or 3 times a week, and I eat on the level where it happened with my family, and it's like 3.5 kilometers away from me where I'm sitting now. So it, of course, it has some impact. But I think that the psychologists have been doing a great job for many, many years, since around 2000, to go into these events on the organizational level.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
So Norway has big competences there too, and Denmark, I think we are quite good at it. But of course it happens.
So, thank you for that. Well, I'm just noticing time.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so Jay, you were talking about the rituals that haven't been really done a lot and should have. What about including forgiveness in the ritual? Can you just, yeah, so is it like, I think it's a condition. It's very important. And it means that the environment that was not supportive is now supportive. And then we can start like to cohabit or coexist again.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Can we explore a little bit this point?
Sure. I mean, I haven't thought specifically about different ways, but obviously for me, I agree with you. Without forgiveness, there can be very little sense of how to move on. And so the question isn't just as well, let's put forgiveness into a ritual. Look, I can't ask someone to forgive me because that's a ritual. I need to have a ritual that will promote and support forgiveness. We don't have that. That's the issue. But I think you're absolutely right. it's exactly that's missing, and that nobody seems to be able to address or has considered important enough to address. I don't know your situation in Lebanon very well. I know better the situation in Ukraine. The idea of forgiveness is anathema at the moment between the Russians and the Ukrainians. The idea, bringing up even the idea of forgiveness is like, what are you talking about? This will never be forgiven. And the problem is we have no ritual. We have nothing that can invite forgiveness back into.
I think Jay, this is a place we could look to the African American community in Los Angeles, in the United States, because there is a way that I've seen since I've moved to Atlanta, that African Americans, some African Americans, have come to a place through their spirituality, really, of forgiving, not condoning what happened, but being able to let go. And I think it would be worth exploring that more. It's in terms of what is it in this community that they are able to do together. And I think it is together.
Yeah.
To make that possible.
What can we learn as psychotherapists from them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to follow that up with you later.
I'm gonna talk that out. I'm gonna do something about that, because I think there are people I can talk to about that.
I would love to hear more. I don't have the answers. I have lots of questions.
In Lebanon, we are really, really far from forgiveness, because the war has been over now since 1991. And I think first we have to acknowledge that we did some horrible things to each other. And we don't do this because there are a lot of people still missing, a lot of massive graves that there's a very strong will not to uncover. So it's literally in the tomb, everything, even the memory. So it's kind of, we're stuck, and it's impossible to get to the point where we can forgive. We're still stuck to just acknowledge what happened.
And avoiding the pain, I imagine, that's part of it.
Well, you can see it every day, how angry the people are. You can see it everywhere, and it's becoming more clear that there's a lot of anger with everyone. So yeah, this is what I'm hearing a lot lately. Everyone is angry everywhere. So where we're not acknowledging our needs, the needs of the citizens of the community. So we're really at the basics.
Well, I mean, where do you put your grief when there are these rituals serve important functions. They were not invented out of nothing. I mean, thousands of years ago, there were rituals to deal with the weather gods, or whatever you want to call them. There were rituals that communities would get together to recognize their place in the cosmos, in the universe, in the whole picture. Now we don't have those rituals anymore. We tend to believe in this idea that we can fix everything, and we do not need to engage in any dialogue to fix anything. We've become too much full of self-mastery. But I would love to know if you or other people in your country have some idea of what kind of ritual could begin to move some momentum towards forgiveness, or alternatively, if we can at least identify, not just for in Lebanon, but in all of us, what are the biggest obstacles for forgiveness, and what do we need that will allow or facilitate some kind of awareness to bring about some forgiveness. Because without that, I don't see how this kind of trauma can be dealt with except superficially. I mean, Gestalt has a way, but we're not political enough. In Gestalt therapy, we are very much still, the many Gestalt therapists that think that therapy is a non-political activity, which is hard for me to accept. But Gestalt therapy is a product of its situation, and the politics is certainly impacting on the situation. So Gestalt therapy is definitely a result of some kind of political, it takes a political stand, whether you like it or not. So does behavior therapy, so does psychoanalysis. And some people claim it doesn't. And I think that that's...
Well, I think the rituals are complex. I think they have a complex variety of support mechanisms within in a ritual. That is the gathering of people is giving people security and safety, and also differences. And you are seeing somebody else crying, I'm not, and then you cry, and all these. So there is a movement involved in that that group process, I think, which is very healthy and important. And from there, I think is created awareness of this is what happened, and acceptance maybe from that. This is the real situation, and here we are people dealing with that situation, and that gives the agent the agent for movement, as you said before. But there is one thing I want to ask you before we close, and that is, you said healthy aggression to sort of move on, to develop or let go of what happened, or sort of move on. And but I have heard so oftentimes talked about fight, fly, and freeze, fight and fly, or flee, is it? Escape. But you said it's through awareness and forming a need, which is going to make the movement, make the aggression happen. And so I fantasize that you think then, if that need is formed, then the agency comes to move out of the freezing, or move. I need to move out of freeze, or I need to calm down out of the escape, or sort of take in the environment, or knock somebody down to regain my energy and aggression to stand on my feet and participate in life. But I've noticed you never did use the concepts, these three concepts, which are so dominating in the trauma discussion. So I just want to hear you sing a song for me about those three concepts and put them in context.
The fight, flight, freeze reaction, for me, usually occurs in the very first phase of the self cycle, the place where it's shame, the place where a person is immobilized because the need, they cannot even identify the need. They are metaphorically just blown away. They have no idea where the ground is that they're standing on. And there's pure desensitization. They don't actually feel anything. That shock reaction, whether you're fighting, whether you're running, whether you're freezing. I mean, it can be enormous strength that a person has in the initial traumatic shock reaction. It may be, imagine, for example, a mother watching her child being squashed under a car wheel by a careless driver. And this mother, who is all of 5'4", goes and lifts the damn car and damages her back, but it doesn't feel any pain while the child is rescued. Where on earth did she get that strength from, and that the adrenaline to kill the pain, to not notice, and that initial fight-flight reaction? That's part of it. There's an enormous surge of chemicals, if you like, which allow the person to do things that are not in awareness. You ask them, can you do that again? Of course not. But it's an amazing thing that they can do. And it's a survival strategy that is pre-reflective. It's before thinking. It's pre-reflective. They're not thinking through, oh, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to lift that car. Nothing is thought through in that moment. So that's pre-awareness. We want to work with awareness and choices. We can't do that until the initial shock has worn off. The need to simply survive supersedes everything else. And then comes the luxury, if you like, of awareness, of organismic awareness, and of contact, and of participation. I think when you talk about rituals, when you started talking about rituals, the fact of a ritual is its enormous capacity to provide a human situated home, a place where people feel welcome and safe and invited. And I know that you are a choir master in another life. And that's a great example of a ritual where people get together to sing. And there's a kind of a sense of community that is established, that the choir will say, well, they can't get that anywhere else. It's only there that they get that sense of togetherness, that sense of being on the same page, so to speak. And this is where rituals prove their worth. It's not just the choir, but every religion has rituals. Every art form has rituals. There are rituals everywhere. We cannot live without them. And they provide an important humanizing function, which, as long as we don't have it in our communities around these kinds of traumas, these man-made traumas, we will constantly be damaged. Interestingly enough, when there are natural, so-called natural events that are traumatic, there are many rituals. People get together for, there's a lot of rituals. The problem with the man-made ones is that people get together very quickly and then they just go away. They don't stick it out. These rituals are not commodities like going to buy a Big Mac when you feel hungry, if you eat that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I love that that the ritual is something that we don't pay enough attention to. We spend too much therapy one-on-one in our rooms instead of in groups. My God, Maria, what are we going to do?
We have questions in the chat, and also people sent questions before the meeting. What do you want to do? Can we choose? What if we choose? What if I choose?
Go
A couple
ahead.
of questions.
All right.
Okay, so I think there was a question I find very interesting because I think we all thought about it. What if we as therapists or psychologists go through the same trauma as you know, the people in our community? And so someone asked this question, what do we do then? Or what can we do?
It's a great question. I can't say what you do, what the Ukrainian, many different Ukrainian institutes, at least 3 that I know of, that I work with, what they do, what they've agreed to do, or have asked to do, is meet together as trainers from the different institutes and simply be in their own support group. To be able to process their own experiences, because they also have practices. They have clients, excuse me. And I understand in general that this has been useful for them. Some of the participants in these groups, after I've been running them for about 3 months now, after this time are beginning to feel that they have enough self-support to say goodbye to the group and to move back into a more familiar context of their life. I think that is that has been for them a useful transition. I think these rituals are not something that we should be doing forever. These groups, for example, I see as a ritual. It's not something forever, it's something for as long as it's needed. And when it's not needed, people move on. And that's absolutely fine. But I do think that in a situation of trauma, it is impossible. I believe it is impossible, like with any experience of loss and grieving, to deal with it on your own. I think it's critically important that people get together in groups and at least some kind of structure where there is a sense of safety and an opportunity to find a place to be at home where you are safe, where you can say what you need to say, whatever it is, and feel that you're welcome. I think it's critically important. I don't know if you have any of that in Lebanon where you are, but I can certainly imagine that it's would be very useful, because I don't think you can manage without it, without some way to bring your own loss, trauma.
We
You're
have
human.
a few groups, yes, we do. We
You're
did that
human.
right after the explosion in 2020, yes. This is how we started the initiative we did, and before contacting you through Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how we started. It was me and my students, actually. We did like 6 or 7 groups, and we worked together on our traumas before going into the field and helping people.
I think it's critically important, and I think those peer groups, they have a place for some people for a long time. I think it's important, yeah.
Someone asked in the chat, are there out there some good examples of these rituals? I can think about the one that was done in Canada a few years ago. I think it was Trudeau, the prime minister, who there was like a big ceremony, an official ceremony to ask for forgiveness and also to acknowledge what happened with Native Canadians. So this is an example I can think about.
Well, also another example would be from South Africa. At the time when there was a change in the policies, the politics, and the government, and Nelson Mandela took over as the first Black president in South Africa. What was part of that process was what they called a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And that group, they went right around the country where there were two sides involved in a political argument, and the two sides got together and they confronted each other. Or confronted may be a strong word, but they came willing to hear each other, see each other, acknowledge what had happened, and try to move on. I think it was somewhat helpful for some people, but not everybody participated. But I think it was a cleansing idea, a cleansing moment. I think it helped diffuse some very long-standing and deep-rooted prejudices that were in South Africa. So that would be another example. I think other countries have also tried what they call truth and reconciliation approach. But but not enough with this.
But in Lebanon, do you think it is doable if we're on a survival mode all the time? Because right now what we need is, basic things. This is what we care about, and this is what the politics have pushed us in this corner, and you just need to get by. This is where we are now. So to take the next step and, do the rituals, or just, I don't know, like do the forgiveness or the acknowledgement, or it will make us too vulnerable in a state where we are already too vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what?
We are where we are now is the speech that you hear all the time is that you have to be careful because you are in danger. So there's like a constant threat from the other one who is different, whoever that is. It could be your neighbor, it could be someone from another country, or someone who has other principles or beliefs. So you are on your guards all the time. So this is the survival mode. Right.
I mean, what you're pointing to is what I'm calling the toxic environment, and without finding ways to address that toxicity first, to create some spaces where people can get together. I don't know how you do it. I confess, I did try to understand and read up on the politics in Lebanon. And I must say, I was unbelievably confused by the end of it. It's so complex. It is so complex. And I'm not even talking about the international politics. I'm just talking about, my God, the internal politics. Was mind-boggling. And I think it's a huge task. How do we bring them together? And I don't believe it's impossible, but I do believe it's not going to happen overnight. There are too many vested interests in keeping, it seems to me, in keeping divide and rule functioning.
That's what 100% right.
yeah, there are too many vested interests in that,
Yes.
which are toxic. They really are toxic. They're not interested, I think, in the humanity of the population. They're interested in power and the trappings of power, it seems, more than what they can do for the country. Now, I should not be speaking about this because I don't know. I'm not
Nobody
Lebanese.
knows. Everyone is confused,
But
including us.
particularly, I'm not Lebanese, so I should shut up. That's my understanding of what it is.
Yeah. It is the best weapon to divide people, and then you can do whatever you want.
Well, that's what most dictators try to do that.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yes, I have a question, if I may ask. Jay, you mentioned about environment for healing. So from the Gestalt perspective, would you say it's rather the one where you are drowning, or the one where is completely the polarity to it? You mentioned like drowning in the water, yes, when you are taking the less breath. So is this from a Gestalt perspective environment to heal the trauma, or completely different environment would be desirable for it? The home, the whatever you call it, yes, the
Well, I think the healing, part of healing is being able to find a home. That is partly the goal of healing. People who need healing or come for therapy, often very broadly, I think, have a sense, an existential sense of homelessness. They don't belong anywhere. It's not a house. Home is, they don't have a set of significant relationships that are welcoming and invitational. This is home. They don't have that. Like Maria was saying, if you live in a culture where you're constantly advised and warned to be vigilant, it's very hard then to open your doors and your windows and say, here's a home, come here, because of the implied danger. So you have to have a lot of courage to open your doors and windows in a situation like that, I think. So yeah, I mean, that is essential for healing to happen. That's why we talk about therapeutic situations as being safe. We call it in Gestalt therapy, it's called a safe emergency. A safe place to allow something to happen that would normally be experienced as difficult. So it's a safe emergency, the therapeutic space. We are responsible for creating that. When you're working as a therapist, when whoever it is, we create that hopefully safe environment for a client. And it fails sometimes. They get mad at us. And that's not a bad thing. It's when we deal with, well, what do you do when your home is threatened? You're going to kill me, or you're going to find a way to stay in dialogue with me? And can we iron this out? Can we figure this out together?
Thank
you. Okay.
Are you meeting again?
No.
Okay.
Well, it's not on the plans. We don't have plans for that.
But you did once before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you can watch the first meeting on our YouTube channel. So you can see it in the chat. I already, and also I've shared it on Facebook, so you can watch the first one. Jay, I don't know how to thank you, but it's we've gone much more than what I've expected, because what I've seen tonight is people from all around the world. I don't know if it's a beginning, but we are thinking in a way to bring people together. I don't know, maybe it's a little bit my romantic side, but this is how I felt like. All of these brains came here tonight to think together how to bring people together and, you know, go beyond the trauma and not be stuck like a lot of countries are. I can see we have a lot of Ukrainian participants. I hope, I don't know if problems or challenges bring people together. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's heartwarming. So thank you for coming. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And also my Lebanese trainees and fellows and friends. Any final words tonight, Jay?
If you want to make a donation to the association that Maria heads up, you can find them in Facebook, and that will be your fee for the time spent here this evening.
you have also
money. She needs the money.
I'm really terrible with money, so I always forget about this.
Don't tell them that.
You have
send her money.
You have received an email. Yeah, you have the email, Al-Najat. And by the way, Al-Najat means survival. So that's why we chose not to go with the victims.
Okay.
Al-Najat is survival. Yeah.
Survival village. I like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
All right, everybody. So thank you, Maria, for sponsoring this. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming, all of you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So much. Bye.
Bye, Ruslan.